So I just want to welcome everybody to our wonderful panel today. Basically what it means to design and direct for VR. And one of the things is I'm going to be like radical and not do what is traditionally done, where we do the whole panel and then everybody asks questions in a very proper way. So if you're up for shaking things up a little bit, I'm going to open it up to really a conversation with all of us, because VR has got a quality that's so new that we want to include people in the conversation as we go through it. So if you have a question or a comment, I want you to feel free to raise your hand during it, and we'll try to watch. Since we have an intimate group, if some of you over here want to move over here and we have closer conversation, great. If you want to stay where you are, that's fine. But we just really want to open it up to the audience as well, and have this be sort of, instead of a just traditional panel where we go down the line a lot, we're going to open it up to a full conversation. I did, because my background is I'm a visual effects producer, and I did have a very specific structure. And then I had the fortune to have lunch with a couple of these guys, and I decided that they're way more interesting than my structure. So we'll go through and just have a good time today. Are you guys up for that? Are we good? Okay. Yay. So just to get a sense real quick, I'm going to do a little poll in the room, because it's one of my favorite things to do. How many people currently work in VR professionally? Okay, great. How many people have done VR? How many people have not put a VR headset on their head yet? Okay, great. You're going to have some fun. She should be our Avenger if she's up for it. Yeah. Because one of the things we also thought that might be fun is we have the Avengers experience here with us with some goggles, and our wonderful floor manager. We're going to keep Paul really busy. So we might take a couple volunteers, and if you who hasn't had a chance, not yet, okay, no problem. But if someone wants to experience Daffy's wonderful work on Avengers, we'll do a couple. We don't want to have a big long line down the middle or anything like that, just a couple people if they want to experience it while we're doing it. Okay, great. You'll be one of our first. So you can experience what he did on the sideline, because it's about 5 minutes and you won't miss too much of what's happening. So without any further ado, I'm going to have our fantastic panel introduce themselves, because you don't need to hear me read their bios. Who wants to start? Rainer will start?
I start first? Okay. All right. Hello, my name's Reinhold Gombos. I'm German living in the States. I actually come from this area. I studied at the Film Academy in Ludwigsburg. And most of my background, my professional background, is in visual effects production, like all of us, I guess. And so, yeah, I come from Stuttgart. I have proof. My mother is there taking pictures. So, she's here to support me. And I was involved with some companies here, local companies. I helped Pixomondo, or I was part of the early Pixomondo team. I don't know if anyone is here from Pixomondo. No? Well,
yay, Pixomondo.
Yeah. So that was a few years ago, and then Pixomondo originally, I think, started in Funkstadt, also Germany, close to Frankfurt, and then we established Pixomondo in Ludwigsburg for feature film, and I helped them create a feature film department, and Pixomondo grew and grew. And eventually I think it was in 14 places around the world, and I had a good time at Pixomondo, did a lot of supervision for feature films there. Still in my Pixomondo days, I supervised Game of Thrones. My friend Steve Kolbeck brought me on the show when it was the second season, and the executive team wanted to make some changes in terms of visual effects then, and we came along, changed some things, and that was fun. Yeah, it was before Game of Thrones was the show that is right now. But I did it for 1 year, and then I left because my family is in Los Angeles, and I had to be in Belfast for a long time for that. So after Game of Thrones, did I think one more feature film, and then I supervised Cosmos, a Space-Time Odyssey, which is a science show with a lot of visual effects, quite spectacular for a science show, pretty large budget for a science show as well. And after Cosmos, the Space-Time Odyssey, I joined a startup, a New Zealand startup called 8i. And 8i at the time was, they were telling me, we have developed a technology that allows to capture not just imagery, but also distance. And I've been waiting for that to happen for quite some time, and I was very, very interested. I joined the team when they were still in New Zealand, and then I helped them establish a presence in Los Angeles, establish a studio there, and it was a startup, so now we've gone through a round A race and so on. And I recently separated from 8i and started my own visual effects, not visual effects, that's the past, VR production company specifically for volumetric VR production or volumetric production in general. Sometimes that still needs to be explained. Hopefully in a few years we don't have to explain that at all anymore. But yeah, maybe if we get into that. Okay, I'll hand it over then.
That'll also be part of my job in the best way I can. If we're, one of the reasons that people don't always include questions for the audience throughout a presentation is there's kind of a fear of trusting the audience to be on topic or go too long or whatever. So if someone's going too long, I'm going to politely do something to say, that is so interesting, thank you so much, and try to move us along. It's not the part of the job that I like, but it's part of the job of the host. So let's pass it on to Alex.
So my name's Alex Hessler. I'm a supervisor at Tippett Studio. I've been there about a year and a half. I also have a visual effects background. I started at Framestore in London, and I've worked at Weta Digital and Pixar. And Tippett brought me in to supervise a theme park ride, which is not quite a virtual reality with goggles, but it's a giant immersive dome ride. Or you sit in these, 80 people sit in these hydraulic seats and you fly around through, it's going to actually be in China. And as part of that, I brought virtual reality in to help visualize that process. So you don't need a 20-meter dome. You can put the goggles on and you can look around and you're in the theme park ride. And that evolved into Tippett Studio getting more and more into VR. And so the VR project that we recently did was a Mad God VR, and I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Mad God? There's a little thing up in the Dell booth if you guys want to check that out later. That's a stop motion piece that Phil Tippett's been producing for years and years and years, and it's very nightmarish, kind of dreamscape stuff, and a lot of people want to know what it would be like to be in this weird world, so it was a kind of a perfect first test for VR. And that's going to be viewable down at the Dell booth if you guys are interested.
Hi everyone, my name's Daffy. I started, like you guys, I think, in visual effects. I was at Framestore as a young whippersnapper, like 18 years old, and 1996, and I was there when there were like 5 or 6 people in 3D in Framestore, and those people were Paul Kavanagh, who I think you saw doing the Star Wars presentation, and Andy Lomas, who went off to do The Matrix, and all these amazing people who basically buggered off and left me in charge. So at 24, I was head of 3D at Framestore for a while, which was pretty crazy. And yeah, and I left that to kind of explore different things. Like I was interested in editing and directing and a few other avenues other than visual effects. So I set a company up called the House of Curves, which I had for 10 years. And I wanted to do, I kind of wanted to do all my dream projects through that company. And I kind of got to do all of none of them. Just because work took over and to keep the business alive, I had to earn money and I never quite got to do it. But along the way, I got to be a director. I did a catwalk show for Louis Vuitton for Paris Fashion Week, and I did a pop video, and I did some art films for a few fashion brands, and it was all really good fun. And then I put a headset on, a virtual reality headset, and everything just sort of a key got kind of unlocked in my head, and all of my projects I sort of felt I could rewrite in virtual reality space. I reapproached Framestore saying, would you help me with my projects? And they really liked them. And they said, yes, we like your projects, but in the meantime, do you fancy coming over and working with us on the Avengers VR experience, which obviously I was, and I did. And I'm going to be talking about that at 3:30 today.
In this very room.
Yeah, in this very room. And that's kind of my story. So I've I finished the Avengers, and I'm now full-time working on making my dream projects happen, and it's going really well, in fact. I think it might actually happen.
Fantastic. Bravo for that. So one of the things that, so I'll just a quick about me. I'm a recovering visual effects producer, and been in visual effects for 30 years or so. And yesterday I did a presentation on the walk. Maybe a couple of you saw it, and have also was the line producer on The Little Prince, which has been shown around the world, and Netflix is going to be showing it, or however they're going to show it in the United States. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about the whole idea, is designing, and if we were to go through the process step by step, I'd like to kind of look at it from the hindsight and have it be more like a lessons learned. So if you were starting a project that you've already done after delivery, and you're looking at what would I have done differently, or what could have I had, or now there's this new really cool technology and I wish we had that available even 6 months ago because it would have made my life better. And maybe talk a little bit about some of that process. Who wants to go first?
I can go first and keep it brief. Basically, I haven't done that many projects yet. I've directed a few that we did at 8i, and because 8i's focus was more on software and the platform, they were not that keen to put a lot of resources into these projects. So most of them, they felt a little bit more like hobby projects at the time. So I tried an approach with my colleagues there in writing a script and making a pitch for the projects that I wanted to try out the technology, and it never quite worked. They thought that visual effects is just incredibly complex and probably expensive, and no investor would ever be wanting to invest in a company that does too much visual effects work. And maybe that's true, but I still wanted to get these through. So in a way, I felt almost like I tricked them into doing them. We wanted to do another shoot to try out some technical things, and then they said, "Oh, well, we could also shoot something else. Rainer, do you want to shoot something?" Oh, okay, yeah, let's shoot this. And then we did some tests, and then from that another test, and it became a little scene that could be used for something. So these things are really just scenes and prototype experiences, but they still work pretty well, and I'm showing them, by the way, on the booth, at the Rialtra booth on I think it's the second floor in the gallery where no one ever goes to. I don't know, it's like upstairs, and they're like red signs that lead you upstairs, but it looks like the emergency exit or something. So people really don't, there's not that much going on up there. But so what would I have done differently? Well, maybe I would have preferred, of course, to have a script for these things. So I could have been more precise at directing these, because when you put these things together, you want to have a really good plan. It feels very much like doing a visual effects shot, of course. I mean, by the way, as we might find out through the discussion, the things that I'm doing are probably quite different to the 3D video that you guys are doing, and maybe we can eventually talk about what the differences are. But for the volumetric content that I'm producing, it's even more important to separate things out. So you have to have the final scene in mind, and then you shoot the things differently, and you actually have to use different technology to putting it together. So the things came together like that, and I wish I would have had a script. I wish I would have had like a budget that was set ahead of time. And what else would I have done better on these? I'm just happy that they exist overall, because even though they're really, really unfinished looking, I'm quite proud that they just came out, because they existed. They were shown at Sundance, and then some people were able to comment on it, and I got a lot of comments here again when I was showing them, and some people are actually quite critical. They say, "Oh, look at that, like the resolution is terrible, you know, it's like this doesn't look finished." It's like, yeah, you know, I'm just happy that it exists, and I see all the imperfections there, and we've been discussed them, and fortunately there's a way to really improve these things, and I'm looking forward to doing more projects and just improving on these and putting more than just like 10 days of work into it. So I'll hand it over then with that.
Daffy, why don't we jump to Daffy and we'll
Sure.
shake it up, not just go down the line.
So when I first tried on the headset at Frame Store, I went around, not just at Frame Store, I looked at a few different experiences, and I watched people's reactions, and I think that's part of VR at the moment, is to really to study how to get a good experience, is to study how people react when they have the headset on. And I noticed a pattern where people put the thing on, and they look around, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing, oh my God. And then they get a little bit bored, and you can see it on their faces. They're like, okay. And they almost can't wait to get it off so that they can share the excitement of the VR paradigm shift with their friends. Like, oh my God, this is the future, what's next? So my job on the Avengers was to go, yeah, we're going to put you in this experience, but I'm going to keep you, and I want to keep you excited. So that was my main goal, was to kind of appreciate that you're giving people this first experience, and what have you got? Like, what are the goods that you're going to give people? You know, how are you going to create the emotions and you know, include some kind of level of storytelling, I suppose.
Yeah, that's something that I think, sort of hindsight, wish I could have put more time into, was that introductory area or room or thing where the viewer can understand what VR is. Because I think a lot of times when you're putting goggles on people, it's the first time they've worn goggles. So half of what they're excited about is just that they're wearing goggles. And so our content starts, you know, within 15 seconds of putting the goggles on. And that's often not enough time for people to get over that little bit of like, what is this? And they're looking up at this guy, and then meanwhile, stuff's happening around them that they're not paying attention to. So I think at least in these early days, it's important to figure out a way to let the viewer sink into the environment, to feel a little bit of presence before you start the content. And I think yours does a good job of that.
Yeah, I rehearsed with people. I put people in the space, and I interview them after, and I record them. And so in the Avengers, you're immediately presented with New York City, and New York's there, a piece of glass. You see your reflection as Iron Man. You tilt your head around, and his head moves. You look down, you're wearing the chest plate. There are all these cues to tell you that you are Iron Man. That's why my talk's called "Oh Fuck, I'm Iron Man," because I wanted people to say, "Oh my God, it's me." But beyond that, I wanted to try and I wanted people not just to feel that they were Iron Man, but that they were also Tony Stark. Up high, New York City, it's your city. You know what I mean? That was his presence. So, and you also get the opportunity to do a 360, look around the Avengers Tower so that you get a feeling of the geography, and that's the start menu. And it means that you can look up and look down, and people can get used to it. And I always say to people, just do a 360 first, and then you press start, so that they're not, as you say, they're not going, wow, this is, you know, they know the rules, and then you can just like wow them with the pre-rendered video.
One of the things that Daffy, you mentioned, which I think is really great, and kind of speaking to what Rainer wanted to be able to do, was that you thought about the very end delivery and really wrote out what you wanted people to experience. You want to just speak about that briefly?
No. I can't. What did I say? I can't remember.
Well, you said, okay, I'll say. Well,
oh yeah, so yeah, a bit previs, I suppose.
The previs, but also that you sort of put out exactly what you wanted people to experience, and then you designed to that.
Yeah, I've drawn a blank. Ultimately, I tried to figure out how I wanted people to feel at the end, and you know, working in VR is pretty much like working on any commercial. You know, you're dealing, well, especially with the client, you're dealing with Marvel, you're dealing with Samsung, and you're dealing with the agency. It's the same deal. So I had to find a language that everyone could understand. So I used previs profoundly, to the point where we were just using very basic blocks to create the experience. You know, the Hulk was a green cube for the longest time. and we used devices almost like theatrical. We used the space like a theatrical space. It was a single camera that goes from one end of the Avengers Tower to the other, and as you're going through like a ride, we're revealing different characters with robots almost covering the characters and revealing them. So everything was hidden in plain sight, but all of that was done at previs level. And I wanted people to look like when you watched it earlier on, and I know when you're looking at Hulk because you know it's here, and I wanted people to have the similar experience every time. So previs was a massive thing. Agency approved it, and and they started doing the agency thing, sort of saying, can we try Captain America over there? And I was like, well, we can, but if we change it and we try it, that's another few days down the line, and we've got 6 weeks to deliver this. Why don't we just keep Captain America where he is and make him look more realistic? And I was quite hard with the client, and they didn't like it at first, but they liked it later when they started seeing the results.
Yeah, I find that the tool set, since it's so new, building these experiences, you have flexibility, but everything takes a lot longer to change. So, something as simple as moving a character isn't, what it is for a visual effects shot, where you can just drag it around in Maya, maybe reanimate, and then hit render again. There's a whole process of, well, what's in front, what's behind, what's the composition, and then the iteration time of doing the work on the computer and then getting it onto the goggles to see if it works is still kind of clunky. So that early design is so important because you need to come up with a place to make those decisions quickly and iterate quickly so that you're not doing creative decision making sort of in post, or what you might call where you're actually in the engine or in the compositor where you're working out the details. We had a very different process on ours. We're kind of a traditional filmmaking VFX studio, and this was really just an experiment. It wasn't designed for a client. It was all done internally, and it was all done sort of under the table in between working on paid projects. So we worked a little late, a bunch of nights, and I think if you add up all the time, it was probably about 3 weeks or a month, including stop motion animation. And so a lot of the design decisions were around that limitation. How much time do we have? What can we realistically do that's not going to suck? And the other thing is the subject material is very strange. If you look at it, it doesn't make any sense if you've never watched any of these shorts. And we kind of had to appreciate that it's for the fans, the people that have seen the shorts and are really wanting to do the VR version of those shorts, but at the same time not require you to understand what's going on. So we just turned it into kind of a spectacle, kind of a zoo, where you're just like, oh, there's stuff around, and there's a little bit more emotional impact if you have watched the shorts and you understand where you are and what the people around you are, and like that there's a kind of premonition of doom because of what you're surrounded by. But when you put the goggles on and you haven't seen the shorts, you're just like, oh, this is weird, it's kind of cool. And so we're kind of just playing on that early VR user in a sense. And I think that's great for the first few years, maybe first year where you're, showing something new. And as the medium matures, we're going to have to come up with much more interesting things to keep people excited. It's kind of like children get bored, and I think. But
I think we're in that kind of play zone at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that directors who are very well established, I don't know if they are struggling, but I find it difficult to supervise projects with directors in VR because I've got a very three-dimensional mind because I previs and I work in CG and I know my Maya, as do you guys, and I find it a very easy step to go into VR because of that understanding. I don't know whether you want to touch on this as well. And I actually had a question do you think there's going to be a VR version of the Cosmos show that you did?
Yeah, I very much hope so. I'm doing my best to convince the important people there to do that. Let's see. I'm not supposed to know anything about what's happening with Cosmos in the future, so I think that would be so awesome. So one of the things that you'll see when you come to the booth is something that I quickly put together that is featuring myself on the Cosmos. So that was just because this is so quickly put together that Neil wasn't around for doing that. I don't even know how many people know Cosmos in Germany. I think, yeah, in Germany, My mother knows Cosmos, so thank you. One hand there, maybe another two.
It's really big in America. So
Yeah.
And
So-
it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
It's maybe if you get a chance, watch it maybe with your children. I've never seen the German version, but Neil is really good in English, of course. He's quite an entertainer. Yeah, so hopefully we have that. How did we get to this?
Oh, I was just talking
how
about
quick
playing.
is it to put it together? Like you're mentioning how it's difficult to move things around. I found it's incredibly easy to move things around for me because I had to find a way to put these things together. We're doing it in Unity, and I was working as a visual effects supervisor for quite a few years, not really working on any software packages anymore, other than spreadsheets and maybe I did some concepts on the way. But then I taught myself some Unity. Not so hard. If I can handle it, then people can pick this up really quickly. And I can just move things around and try out different things, and that's why I was able to put these experiences together, some of them mostly by myself. I think that should also speak for these experiences. So if one person can put these things easily together, and there's no rendering because it's real time, then maybe there's a lot of potential for people just trying out things and getting very creative with this medium. The difficult part so far was to, what do you put into these scenes? And fortunately, there's now the 8i technology that allows you to capture humans, so you could put humans into the scene. And what I really like doing is I do photogrammetry, and that's another aspect of these experiences that I put together. I would be interested to know how many of you actually understand what I'm talking about. If I would talk about volumetric experiences. If I say volumetric, oh, some of you, okay. Should I maybe explain? Oh.
Yeah.
Let's ask the audience. Does someone want to just say a couple words of what they understand volumetrics to be? Anybody? Any brave souls out there? Oh, come on. Really?
You're all fired.
Here we go.
Like, I'm not really sure, so it could be absolutely wrong, but is it when you scan people, then you have their like volume and put it inside of it?
Yeah, when you scan people, you have something volumetric coming from that. So it's basically, we had to find a term. Even back at the 8i, it's like, how do we explain this to people? It's weird that we have to explain it because it's so similar to our reality, the reality that we live in. It's just three-dimensional. It's like it has volume. If something is there in your way, you do something, you just walk around it. You just look around it. You move your head. So it's basically creating these spaces that really have distance and shape. And then you walkable VR experiences, I guess you could call them like that. And all of the new headsets, like the high-end headsets, support that, of course, just like the Oculus Rift and the Vive and then PlayStation VR. Gear VR does not yet, but then I'm sure they're going to develop some tools that allow for some position tracking. It's the combination of the 3 degrees of freedom that you get from looking around the space, which is in 360 video. That's beautiful. You can be in one spot and you can look around and there's cool stuff all around you. And then if you have 6 degrees of freedom, then you can actually move into the scene and you can look at things from behind and move around it, which gives you even more immersion and gives you a good feel of where you are in the space and how large the space is. And that's really similar to what we do in reality all the time. So basically, if I create an experience in VR, it's a bit like setting a stage and then putting something together that exists in our reality. So yes, you do some scanning or photogrammetry to create these volumetric things. And all games, in a way, would be probably volumetric that come out for the Rift and the Vive. 360 video, it's a lot more challenging to do that with reality, and stereoscopic is already challenging, and the pieces are beautiful. I mean, when I flew over, I had a Gear VR and I watched a lot of videos. I watched your piece, excellent piece. I think I showed it to my parents as well. And it's really quite amazing. I want to focus more on the volumetric part. I think that is really the far future. It's quite complex because you're dealing with some technical challenges there, huge amounts of data. I mean, you're already dealing with a lot of data with 360 video.
But I think that's the extraordinary thing, though, is that that VR isn't one thing, and it doesn't just cater to one person. I love the fact that you're doing the volumetrics. I love the fact that you've dealt with stop frame work, and I like the pre-rendered, and I choose the view, the camera view, because I feel like as a filmmaker, I like to set the camera, and I've got some new previs for some of my new films, and I show it to people, and they don't say, oh, it's nice, but I wish I could move around that. They're fine with where I'm placing them. And so I think that's the beauty of this thing, and it almost kind of annoys me that people are putting these rules and restrictions, and they're saying what VR is and what VR isn't, and it's like there's, you know, most of the population haven't put this thing on their head yet, and we're already saying what it isn't. So I love the possibilities. So I love the fact that you're doing something so different, and we can all learn from each other. But you know, I had a big graphics card company tell me that my process was wrong last week. You know, you need this, you need more power, you need to be able to do this, you need to be able to do that. I'm like, no, I have my process, and I'm quite happy exploring that, and everyone has their own niche.
I think there's actually an interesting gradient in this group from what the technology that I started with, which goes back to Ray Harryhausen, you know, black and white, you know, stop motion animation, all the way through to these volumetric captures where you're doing real-time processing of three-dimensional data. And to give you a contrast from what he was describing, when you put the goggles on, if you stand still and look around, there's not an obvious difference in that my stuff, you can see depth and things are in front of each other, and it appears to be 3D, but that's all an illusion. In reality, it's a bunch of two-dimensional images that are, you see a different one in your left eye and your right eye, and that tells your brain that it's 3D, but they're not. So that's one of the big differences in what he's describing when he says volumetric, is the end result. You might not notice the difference, but when you're editing and designing the process, when you have a three-dimensional object in the computer that you're actually seeing in real time, it gives you the ability to move the camera in ways that you couldn't do when it's sort of baked in. And so with the 3D 360, what do we call it, 360 stereo videos, which is kind of like what ours are both. Ours are very much, the camera's locked in position or it's animated on a track, and you are being taken on the path that the director has decided on. Or with his, the path is open. You can, the viewer can walk left or right or go around behind the subject and not look at their face at all. And there's very different design problems to solve when you're dealing with something like that versus the things that we've been doing.
Anybody have any questions at this point from the audience? Or yeah.
Thank you. Well, I want to point out two things. One is actually what we call stereoscopic 3D should be called binocular 2D, as you said, because we're looking at flat images with two eyes. And historically speaking, stereoscopos, is from the Greek, and it says the vision of volume, which actually binocular 2D is not, and what volumetric is. So it's real stereoscopy, basically.
And
maybe we can change the buzzwords together. I don't know.
Well, that's hard. I mean, for how many times people talked about 3D, talking about computer graphics, and now talking about 3D, but talking about stereoscopic. So there's a lot of work in there. I wanted to point out, because all these talks on the FMX are basically about vision and so little about sound. And I mean, let's be honest. Let's be honest. Did any of you experience binaural sound? I mean, this is a really amazing kind of virtual reality, because you don't have the vision. But if you have binaural sound, I don't know if anyone knows what binaural sound is about, but then you just put on the headphones and you close your eyes, and then you're in the Abbey Road studios or in the Scala in Milan or whatever, because the acoustic is transferred to your ears as it should be. So this is a kind of virtual reality, and I think for this, that's just what you said. It's virtual reality is a lot of things, and it's a lot of ways to show and to do this. But I think also virtual sound is very important to all the storytelling and all the different things. And I would have last one question: are you doing the Tippett show in stereoscopic or not?
It is in stereoscopic.
Okay.
And we are actually using
Stop motion.
binaural sound. So it's stop motion shot in stereo.
That's great.
So just for there, I think probably most of the audience knows what binaural sound is, but go ahead
I
and
can
just
give a
describe
sort of
that,
explanation.
and then
So
in the-
yeah, the concept is in the original binaural sound was recorded. They built these sort of dummy heads, and they put microphones in the ears of the dummy heads, and they recorded sounds, moving around the head. And the idea is that we perceive sound through essentially two holes, like in our ears. But we can tell not just left to right, but we can tell when things are above us and below us and behind us. And the way that works is that the sound bounces around against our ears, and our brains perceive those changes in the sound waves. So if something's behind me, it kind of passes through some cartilage, things like that. And what binaural sound is either a pre-recorded mix of that experience, whereas in VR, that has to be simulated in real time. So if you're a sound's over here, and then you turn your head, and it's over here, that sound has to change how it comes through the headphones to convince your mind that it's behind you now. And the technology is getting better and better. We're using it in our experience as a storytelling device because when we started, the convention was seated VR. No one was doing, standing wasn't quite what people were ready to do yet. And so the problem with seated VR is when you're sitting, you're looking at a screen normally, and so you put the goggles on people and they just do this. And they don't look around, and you kind of have to yell through the headphones, look around, and they go, oh, and they figure it out. So we said, well, what if we had sound pull people's attention? So there's this dead space of sound in front of them, but you hear a lot of commotion behind you, and then we also enhance that with some of the characters around you. They start turning around, so you start, well, what are they looking at? I hear this. And then it pulls you around. So we're using sound as a way to guide the viewer, which is working most of the time, but people perceive reality in so many different ways. I think it depends on how tuned into sound you are. Some people who are very sound-oriented will get drawn, almost like they'll be controlled by that binaural space. And there's some people that just don't even know that it's happening. And the VR experience, sort of for our VR experience, doesn't work if you don't listen and let that pull you around. And I've talked to some of the engineers at Google, and they found that there are some people with strange shaped ears, and they the binaural doesn't really work for them. The same way there's a percentage of the population that can't see stereo when you put on the 3D glasses. Oh, wow. So these are all things that we have to kind of come into a design, like how many people are we catering to? Are we going to try and attract attention in every possible way? And then it becomes kind of cliched or kind of faked. It gets to be too much. So it's a tricky creative problem.
Yeah, sound was big for me in the Avengers. I spent a lot of time getting the sound mix right. In fact, before we started any CG, and I kind of rewrote the script that existed because I wasn't very happy with it, it cost that millions to make the image, but it doesn't cost so much to make the sound. It's quite easy to go on the internet and just find sounds and steal bits from the current Avengers films, and you can create a sound suite. So I actually got everyone I made a soundscape for the Avengers experience, which you'll hear in the talk. I get everyone to close their eyes and listen to it. So I said, look, it's really hard to tell you how this is going to look, but I can definitely tell you how it's going to sound. Everyone closed their eyes, they put the headphones on, and they're like, oh, wow, this is going to be amazing. And it's amazing the images that you concoct from sound. So that's how I started. We went into the sound recording studio when we'd finished the image, and we did this perfect mix in stereo with the TV in the middle, and we were all really happy, high fives. And then Framestore was saying we need to make it binaural, and so suddenly everything had to be broken into stems, and we had all these different sound effects attached to Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and the shield, and all that stuff. And it was a great concept, but my sound mix was screwed. So I had a couple of days before delivery, and in After Effects, I was just literally just trying to get the volumes good enough to work, and we got it finally, and I was happy with it. But yeah, binaural is great, but I reluctantly had to do a remix. So there needs to be a new way in sound recording studios to do a binaural mix in VR first before we spend all the time doing like a stereo mix. But these things will happen, I'm sure.
Yeah, that level of polish I found really challenging, where we get a stereo mix because there's an existing knowledge base for doing stereo mixes, and there's a real art form there. But you get it to binaural, and the stereo mixers are like, I don't have the tool set to do that. So you end up with an engineer in Unity. You're kind of sitting over their shoulder with headphones on, and like, no, that has to be like, that's louder. And they've got 200 stems that they're trying to juggle with C-sharp scripts and things like that, and there's probably a good tool set out there, but we've been struggling.
Isn't there like an amazing room in Ludwigsburg at the Film Academy, like a spatial sound system? So we
have a sound stage,
yeah.
mixing, and a cinema.
Can you put a mixing desk in there and figure and do a soundscape based on that?
Yeah.
Okay, well there you go.
Just got to fly out here. That's
yeah, I like flying out here.
Yesterday there were some presentations about Dolby Atmos and sound studio and virtual sound.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chances in the audience, actually.
Yeah. Sorry, can I quickly ask a question to Alex?
Yeah.
I was wondering on the Mad God experience. I just saw it, and it's really amazing actually to see these very like detailed and textured models in stop motion just coming right into your face actually. Yeah. And I was wondering, were you able to like assemble this what you see there in the studio and just animate and shoot it like this, or did you need to break it down into elements and composite it together somehow?
Yeah, that's a good question. We started normally in stop motion you shoot it in one pass. So you build the set and you do it to the camera, and you get your lighting, and you look through the lens, and you tune and tune and tune until it's just right, and you take a shot, animate, take a shot. So that's how we started. But there's 24 characters around the camera or the viewer. And then there's another character that comes forward, and there's a thing in the back, and there's things going over you. And we did the math, and the animators would die of exhaustion because they'd have to crawl through a little hole in the set where the camera is and animate these guys. And we even broke it into quarters, so they could work on one quarter at a time and shoot that, and then we'd stitch it all at the end. The set's probably about 6 feet across. Each of the characters is about this high. So what we decided to do, and we were a little nervous, if anything goes wrong, it's 60 seconds, and if someone trips and knocks a bunch of things over, then all your 10 animations you've got going at once all have to get cleaned up and started over, and it was sort of terrifying. So we shot the static set as in camera as you see it, and then each character is shot on a green screen, and we composited it sort of traditionally in Nuke on a lat-long image. And that was an incredibly tedious process, but it gave us a lot of flexibility to make sure that things were in the right place. And because there's a lot of flexibility when you're working in the stereoscopic, in that you can move things forward and back by adjusting the interocular distance. So if we had a character that was here and we felt like it was too crowded, we could shift him back by shrinking him in screen space and then shifting the eye distance. And we did a lot of that kind of fudging in that, and it doesn't really break. And that was kind of what was interesting, is that there's a lot of tricks that we think, you have to simulate reality for the brain to believe it. And that entire piece is completely breaking all the rules, and you just eyeball it. It's just about like an artist holding it up and saying, does it look good? No, I'm going to make the foot a little different. I'm going to nudge things here and there.
But in the future, sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Alex has a 6-minute piece with him that shows Phil Tippett kind of talking about this process, which we could put on the screen. We've got about 20 minutes left for our presentation. How do people feel? Would you like to see that? Yeah, okay, let's play it.
Someone want to do the experience at the same time as well?
Oh yeah, and if somebody wants to, yeah, go ahead. So we'll set up a couple people having an opportunity to do the experience while we show the 6-minute video, and you can see the 6-minute video another time. Right.
Let's just see.
Let's see. All right. The other thing is for people who are interested in VR sound, I just want to point out that Chance, who did The Void, is in the audience here. So maybe we'll pull him up front to either answer some questions or be part of our conversation after when people want to come talk to us, because he did incredible work on The Void, which is one of the most amazing VR experiences, I think, out there at this point.
Grew up and was trained in a time where you made stuff, like physical things, and I miss that. Ray Bradbury once said, "The more you work with machines, the more you will become like one." And it's very different when you're dealing with objects and things and materials. On Jurassic Park, the initial approach was going to be conventional. And simultaneously, Steve Williams, Mark DePay, and Stefan Fangmeyer were trying to prove that a living, breathing character could be done with computer graphics. They did this test with a Tyrannosaurus skeleton moving, took it down to Steven, and he went like, that's how we're going to do it. And that's where everything just went. The positive side of it, after I got incredibly depressed, was the inciting incident that kind of kicked me upstairs. In retrospect, looking back, it's just like anything, from warfare to automobiles, technology drives everything. And with Star Wars, we applied motion control technology to stop motion puppets, and we changed how all that stuff was done. And then when computer graphics came in, it was another technological shift that just changed the world. For my day job, I'm a consultant, visual effects supervisor, director. Mad God is kind of the antipode of my day job. I would characterize it as an experimental stop-motion film. I actually started making it over 20 years ago. Working with film was just such a pain in the ass that you had to get all this stuff right first, and then you were always it was like disarming a bomb. It's influenced a great deal by dreams. My dreams, like most people's, are very fragmented and kind of all over the place and non-specific, driven by anxiety. The way I think about this stuff is more experiential and less story-driven. I was about as savvy about VR as I really was about computer graphics. I mean, even less so. For the VR piece we're producing, Mike came and said, hey, it would be really cool to do it with stop motion.
I had just seen Mad God, which was this wild stop motion animation piece, unlike anything I had seen before. And the connection was immediate. It was like, I have to see puppets life-size in VR. We had one of those intuitive connections with the guys at Weaver. We heard that they were funding content made by artists. And we said, that's us, that's what we're doing.
As we fell in love with VR, we actually realized that we want to make VR ourselves. But the only way to actually really have a rich language for story, you actually have to collaborate. What we were interested in it was stop motion animation, it was Phil Tippett, and it was Kaleidoscope. And at that point, we were just like, yes, go ahead and do it.
I do not think VR is the future of filmmaking. It's the Wild West. It's like nobody knows nothing. The opportunity to experiment and try things that you haven't seen or you haven't imagined is it's just all out there. It's not story-centric, it's like action choreography. The two leading team members for the VR project are Alex Hessler and Chris Morley. And what they bring to the team is they know how to make it happen. I don't have a clue.
We're all doing this for the first time. There's not really anybody that's done VR for years and has a lot of experience. So our team is full of people, including Phil, that have years and years and years of experience and a lot of ways to solve certain types of problems.
As far as VR at Tippett, this is a fairly new experience for us, but it's not our first experience doing something new. I actually wasn't sold until I saw the first test that we did for Mad God. That may sound terrible, but seeing something created by hands, composited into something shot physically, it's really magical to me.
Very quickly, I came up with a theater in the round kind of idea, since you're kind of a disembodied, dreamlike entity in the middle of this 360-degree world.
How do we compel the audience to play along? To say like, no, look at what we're wanting you to look at. Look at the cool thing we did over here.
Well, it just meant changing how one approached the narrative, because it took away all your editorial tools for telling a story, but it gave you else something that was really pretty cool, which was being able to direct by the location of sound in the three-dimensional sphere.
Because it was shot in a certain way to where you felt you were the size of these puppets, was like truly amazing.
It really is that first-person dream world. It's all experimental, it's all really wild. I mean, it was kind of like that, you know, working for George or Steven really early on. What do you want to do what you've already done 100 times before? You know, I understand, to make money, whatever. But my mind just doesn't go there. It's like, you know what would be really great is like an LSD VR thing. That would be really fucking cool.
All right. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Microphone coming in.
Maybe just a small commentary that, so I was involved in showing people every one of these projects, and it would be really nice if people wouldn't be on stage, but come to the booths and experience everything like maybe in privacy, because it's a bit distracting in watching the video in parallel and seeing someone going through this intimate experience in front of the whole audience, I guess. And this is what we're there for, so we're volunteers, so just come at the VR gallery upstairs and experience everything. Thanks.
Thanks, Ella. Yeah, it's upstairs, you know, it's like really, people don't know where it is.
You go in the corner, it's like the circular staircase. Like you said, look for what feels like an emergency exit and you'll find it.
Yeah, red signs.
Yeah. Let's see, was there over here. We have a question over here. And then we'll come back to you over on this side. We got to get something from this side of the room too, right?
Hello, my question is, I'm a producer and I'm always watching the panels, I'm enjoying it in FMX, but I don't get the quality measurement process sometimes, because 3VR is, when I look on it, it's a bit distracting, but how is really the process a bit more about from concept to the next stage, then going to Unity? I would love, is there a coordinator? Does the director coordinate all? I don't get really the team process in all the panels a bit, because that's for me, which comes from visual effects, there's always a kind of a structure, but here it's a bit free, what I like, but I don't know how the creative process is here a bit.
I think you'll get three very different answers, but I'll start with ours. We didn't know what we didn't know, so we have a coordinator, and they were sort of / producer, and they were primarily client negotiations and then managing scheduling for the tasks that we could quantify, which was probably like less than half of what actually needed to happen. We started standard previs, like storyboarding, previs, mocking things up, and then since we only had a few weeks, we just jumped straight into production and just made it, and then adjusted any mistakes in kind of in the comp. So it was very much like a VFX style of workflow, and I think there's probably better ways to do it, and I think we're going to keep refining it. So locking it down into any sort of the right way, it's still too early, I think.
Yeah, the process is there is no process. One of the things that tripped me up at Framestore was that they'd written this amazing shader to do 360 rendering, but it was equilateral or something. You know, I couldn't get my head around the fact that if you render a 360 image from one eyeball and render it from the other, why when you turn your head around you don't get cross-eyed? Because you know, when you turn around, your eyeballs don't rotate to the back of the head. Your whole head rotates, and then you're looking, your eyes are on the other side, if that makes sense. And I realized it's like a slit scan rendering system that they've developed, and now there's a shader that you can download that will assist you with Arnold rendering, which is now, as soon as I got that on my laptop, that was it, I was away. So my process now is I'm just prevising the hell out of stuff, all these ideas I've had over the years, and it's just, it's so fun. But a completely different one for shooting. There's so many different cameras. I looked at the Facebook camera recently. I went to MPC and they showed me a test of Grand Central Station with these crazy resolutions with one of these Samsung gears, and I felt like I was there. It was extraordinary. But then jumping to a different test I did last year in Miami, in the Miami Straits underwater, I wondered what it would be like to cheat it, and so we did a test where I got the DOP to shoot with a fisheye lens, and we filmed straight up, and then we did the same. We filmed straight down, and I realized that there was basically whenever anything goes into depth, it just goes into blue, which is basically my matte line. And I put the two together, and you can't look up and down at the same time, so it doesn't matter if they're not tracking properly, and it's great. It works so well. And so that's going to be my process for one of my underwater projects, is just cheat. So there is no process, as far as I'm concerned. It's make up your own.
Rainer, did you have a production team?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things I had to do by myself. But of course, I have some experience now with visual effects pipelines, having worked on some features. So I try to adapt some of the processes there for what we did at a very, very small scale. Of course, we had to coordinate the efforts of the different team members. But, I mean, you start with an idea, and when you work on volumetric content, you do use game engines currently to bring all the assets together and create a world. So you start with an idea, but for a space, basically. You think, where's the viewer? And one of the first questions is, how large is the area that the viewer will be able to move through this space? If it's for a seated experience, then of course the viewer just wants to move around or even just rotate his head, and then as he rotates his head, he already has parallax. So the things that excite me are when you give the viewer a large amount of freedom in the space, like what the Vive offers. So you map out the space. Yeah, what is going to happen in the space in these tests that I'm showing? There's like a performer in the space, and there's going to be hopefully a realistic background, maybe based on a real location. So you sketch these things out, and in the case of the Wasteland experience, I started with the performer. I shot the performer with this 8i recording rig, which is basically allows you to put a performer in a space in this invisible volume that's being captured by machine vision cameras that are surrounding the performer. And of course, their cameras are pointing outwards. The cameras that we're using are mostly pointing inwards. You want to surround it so it looks from all directions. And then when the performer's in the space, it's in a green screen studio, then you need to know what the performer is going to be doing. The performer is going to see green screen. So it's quite difficult to direct the performer. You need to have a clear idea when is what going to happen. So here we have a girl in the desert, and she's going to have some eye lines to something that is nothing. So you have to give her an eye line, but with the restrictions of the set that is covered with cameras. So you have to plan it out. You have to know when things are going to happen. You have to time them out. We had a timer. We had an AD telling her how long things were going to be. And so you shoot one performer, and you shoot the next performer, because in the case of this Wasteland experience, the second performer is driving in a car. And that's how I bring one of these performers into the space of the viewer, and the car is going to be a CG asset. It's not going to be photogrammetry. So there are going to be 3 types of assets in the scene. There's going to be these video grammetry recordings of performers. There's going to be a background that's based on photogrammetry, and there's going to be a car, and the car is a CG asset that I downloaded on TurboSquid for $15 and had an artist change. So you bring all these together in Unity. You record the performer, hopefully you get the right timed performance. You get the other performer that needs to be timed with the first performance, because you want to shoot them individually so you don't have occlusion problems. all of these things are pretty complicated. I know we're like a little late, so I just browsing over it. And you bring them all together in Unity. You put some lighting into it, maybe I added some particle effects just so there's more happening there. You can animate some of the assets, and you play with it. And the good thing is you can really quickly iterate on these experiences. So you make progress really fast, and that's a really enjoyable process. As you see things are advancing, you drop something new in, and the experience changes. And you do the sounds, and you place the sound cues, you place them in space. And I had a friend compose some music for it, so that was fortunate. And then you have a little piece that it plays like a game. You start a Unity game, and it plays like a scene, like a walkable scene that could be part of a movie-like experience. So that's how we put that together. And then to coordinate all these people, we use Trello to coordinate. It's like a low-end tracking software, I guess. Yeah.
But you talk about like the cheap TurboSquid model. I'm pitching a pretty hefty project to a big client, and one of the tests I've done is Jeff Koons, the big dog. You know, he does the inflatable sculptures made of metal, but they look light as a feather. I downloaded the Jeff Koons from TurboSquid for $15. Was $15, and I animated it bouncing along, made it jump over my head, and it's extraordinary. It looks amazing, and everyone's wowed by it. And that's what I think is the most exciting thing, is that whatever ideas you have and whoever you think you might be able to sell it into, VR is the way to do it, because you can wow a client so easily in VR versus showing something on a laptop or a TV screen. It's just like, oh fuck, I'm in the room. You know, it just seems to be an easy sell. I hope I get the project.
We do too, Daffy. We do too. Alex, do you have any closing comment?
Well, let's see. I think as we've said over and over again, this is so brand new, and I mean, we're up here because we've made some VR stuff, but we're not. I wouldn't say I'm a director or an expert in VR. I think I've experimented for a year and a half, and that's
right place, right time.
Yeah, and so I think everyone here, 5 years from now, we're all on even ground. So if you're interested in doing it, just grab one of these engines, grab some goggles, and you can get up and running in less than a day. So just start making stuff, and we can all solve these problems together.
That's beautiful, man.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.